You're either going to break up or you're going to get married. Those are the two options. There's no other option here.
That's true.
So if you're going to get married in spite of being in love.
I didn't see a countdown.
Hey,
Are we
Kyle?
on? I didn't see a countdown, Cameron. We're on.
Yeah, we're on. We're being recorded.
Okay.
So stop picking your teeth and
Yeah.
start working. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what is when you sent me the idea behind today's conversation, it made me a little nervous, and I'll just read it. Our topic today is advice to kids prepping for marriage and newlyweds.
Yeah. Why does that make you nervous? You've succeeded. You've gotten two who have
So far,
captured beautiful spouses who, I mean, they just seem ideal, but maybe that's just all a show. Maybe they're horrible and you don't want to talk about this.
I don't know. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, they've only been married a couple of years each, so they don't have kids yet. So, we don't know. We don't, and maybe it's my sons that are the horrible ones, right?
Right. That's funny. Well, let me ask you this. How did you find out that your kids were going to get married? Was the decision made and it was an information, or did they seek advice? Did they say, "Hey, I'm thinking about
No, they both came to,
marrying this gal"?
both of my sons are married, and they just came to me and said, "You know what? I don't remember." But certainly they didn't seek my advice. Now I will say that my oldest son had brought a couple of girls to our house. And we have this theory with our kids, which is before they even start dating, we tell all of our kids, listen, here's the deal. At some point, you're going to be infatuated with somebody. And we want to talk to you before that happens. Because once you're infatuated with somebody, nothing we say is going to matter. So we're going to say it now before you get infatuated. And that is this. If everybody that has loved you your whole life tells you to be careful, listen to them. Because we're not afraid to tell you to be careful now. And that we have to tell them that before they get infatuated, because once they get infatuated, then they're like, well, they said you would say that, right? Then it becomes they're so lost in the infatuation they can't reason properly. Because that.
Tell me more about that. Why would in the case of marriage, where does reason fall? Because if you talk to 6-year-old girls, the reason they're going to get married someday is because they're going to find a Prince Charming who they're going to fall deeply in love with and then marry them and live happily ever after.
Yeah, so I guess we're back.
Nowhere did they talk about reason.
Well, we're backing up to when they first start dating, right? Because I think it starts there, frankly. I think it
starts before they start dating, but yeah, I hear what you're saying.
You're right. Yeah, it does start before they start dating, but I think to let your kids know that. Shelley came up with this idea because Shelley was never infatuated with anybody, right? I'm not sure she was infatuated with me. That wasn't the way my wife did things. But I had seen, and I'm not sure I wasn't a victim of this as well. When your first love comes along, and it's so cool and exciting and thrilling that you kind of quit listening to anybody other than your heart or what you think is love, right? And so that can become this overriding mental state to where you start to, if the person you're in love with may not be the best for you or doesn't agree or doesn't really jibe with who you are, it doesn't really matter. I mean, sometimes for guys, it can be a physical thing, right? For girls, I don't know how it works for girls. I'm not a girl, but I know you see a beautiful girl when you're a kid and you're like, holy moly. And then she shows you some attention. You can lose your freaking mind. You know what I'm saying? And so I think it starts before that. And that's why I think we kind of had that conversation with our kids, which is nothing is going to be easy. And the thrill of it is going to fade. the thrill of it is going to fade. And at that point,
Hmm.
you really have to start. It's going to be work, right? And so
Yeah.
hopefully that describes why I don't know that I answered your question. What was your question? I guess what is
Where does reason fall? Because that's not the story. That's not the story that's sold in the movies. It's
yeah.
not about
Well,
marriage. Is not about reason. It's all about emotion. So,
okay.
but we live in the real world.
And that might be a big part
Why are you
of that,
laughing?
because that's a big part of it as well. You know, emotions emotions are such powerful things that they can do. The
Sure.
emotion of love is the most powerful emotion in the world, and it can move mountains, and it can change the world for good, and it can also cause you to be jealous and kill somebody, right? I think emotion is
Sure.
power and it's fuel, but there needs to be a lot of reason that goes in that as well. I mean,
Okay.
and I think my wife was very she was obviously emotional, but she also had a tremendous amount of reason as well. And so she realized making decisions in the height of emotion wasn't always a good thing. Very rarely is making real serious decisions in the height of emotion a good thing, right? I think that emotion needs to subside. You need to come back to earth,
Yeah.
and then you need to think through your decision making process. Because if we make all of our decisions in the heat of the moment, we're going to be in real trouble on both sides, for good and right.
So what you're saying is, don't go shopping when you're hungry, and don't get married when you're infatuated.
That is what I'm saying. And I'm also going to say this because I had an experience with my older brother. My older brother got divorced, and he was in a pretty hard situation for a while. And then he got divorced, and he started dating.
Sure.
He started dating pretty quickly. Um, and within a month or two, I want to say 2 months, he met the girl of his dreams. You know, and he said to me, "Kyle, she's
Mm-hmm.
it. You know, this is the girl." And I said, "That's great." I said, "So just wait a year, and if she's the girl, marry her." And he said, "Why would I wait?" I said, "Well, because you're you're infatuated right now. I get it, right? You don't even know this girl yet. I'm not saying you should. I don't have the recipe for it, but
Mm-hmm.
my brother had gone from a marriage that ended in divorce to infatuation very quickly. And he said, "Well," he
Sure.
said, and he said, "You know what, Kyle? It's not infatuation. It's the spirit." And I said, "Well, those can be confused a lot of times." And I'm not saying I'm not saying you
Yeah,
are.
we that's one thing that I believe, that emotion can really be confused. It is so easy to confuse an impression with emotion. That's rough. That's a hard thing to
And
discern.
he told me, "I know the difference between emotion and the spirit." And I said, "Completely not questioning that." I said, "But if you're going to marry this girl, wait a year. If she's the right one, she'll still be there." And he said, "Well, why should I wait? If she's the right one, why should I wait?" And I said, "I just think it's smart to escape that initial infatuation part. I'm just suggesting that." You do what you want to do. It's your life. But I'm, and I just, and by the way, that's what my wife and I did. I mean, we had a discussion.
Okay.
We dated for, I don't know, 6 months or so. And then we decided we wanted to get married, and we had a year. And I'm sure it was because of me. And I know some people don't do this, but I wanted to see her in every season. I wanted to see her in all kinds of different situations. And I wanted her to see me face different things and challenges in different situations. So she could say, and we agreed, hey, if we're walking up to the temple to get married and you think it's not the right thing to do, you need to tell me at that and I need to tell you. And we agreed to that, right? And that was kind of the way we communicated with each other. And I'm not suggesting that's right for everybody, but I'm
Yeah.
suggesting then the infatuation part of it's a powerful emotion, right? It's that the thrill is so powerful that I think it's important for us to be cognizant that that does exist, and that can be confused with the spirit. By the way, my brother didn't marry this girl right away, and she turned out to be somebody that he didn't think she was. And I'm and maybe he was somebody,
Yeah.
maybe he ended up being somebody she didn't think he was either. I don't know, but it was good that they gave it
Sure.
time, right? And so,
So that, it's one of those things where I have, I have three kids that are marryable. They're in their 20s, and an 18-year-old who has a significant other as well. And it's interesting to hear the advice that they're given. And I actually disagree with a lot of the advice they're given. Some of the advice is to hold off with marriage until after they get done with school. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. Why is that a benchmark for starting a family that in theory is supposed to be eternal? What is it that finishing school does? Well, I don't know. And no one's explained it to me. They talk about, oh, you'll know yourself better. I'm like, that's a load. I'm 49 years old and I don't know myself. I'm still working on it. So that doesn't ring true. And then I've had others like, I have some kids that are in pretty serious relationships, and I have, I've watched them get advice from people that are trying to do the best for them, but they're like, hey, you're going really fast, slow down. And I just smile and I tell them, well, no one knows what you're going through except for you. This is the first time this has ever happened. And they're like, what? Because they think, oh yeah, people fall in love every day. Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. This is the first time that you and this person have ever started down this road together. And the advice I give my kids, I don't tell them to slow down. I don't tell them to speed up. I tell them, hey, as you make sure you know where you're going, and if you're not going there together, it's probably not going to work out. So you can, you're either going to break up or you're going to get married. Those are the two options. That there's no other option here.
that's true.
So if you're going to get married in spite of being in love. And I recently had a young man ask me for my daughter's hand. And I think this guy's great. I love him. I think I might love him more than I loved my kids before they turned 2.
You probably don't know him
Okay.
that well.
I
though.
mean,
Yeah,
when I don't know him at all.
right.
Just like I didn't know my kids when they were 1
Yeah,
and 2.
yeah.
I didn't
Right.
know them, right? But at least I can converse with them.
Yeah.
But I love these. I love these guys. This one guy, I said, well, listen, I want to ask you some questions. He asked me for my daughter's hand, and I said, okay, I want to ask you some questions. For what reason do you want to marry my daughter? And he listed off some great reasons, some attributes that my daughter has that I see myself. So he's not speaking ignorance. He's not speaking something that's not there. He identified some attributes that my daughter does in fact have, and I agreed with him. And then he said, and I just love her so much. And so then I asked him, well, are you going to be able to stay married when you don't love her so much? And, I think that shocks him. And then I explained, hey, love, if it's anything like it was for my wife and I, it grows over time. But as it grows, it ebbs and flows. And if you marry someone because you love them, because you have a feeling of love, and that's the baseline reason, I'm sorry, you're destined to fail because you can't maintain that sensation. You call it infatuation, maybe it's a little different, but you can't maintain that excitement of love. It transitions into a deeper, more meaningful type of love. You won't be able to maintain that excitement love for very long. I mean, and what I hear you say that you were telling your brother to wait a year, to me, what I heard was, hey, you need to make sure that this isn't excitement love that ebbs and goes away. You need to make sure that this is loyalty love, where for in our household, we talk, it's a covenant between God, man, and woman. And so as you both draw closer to God, it actually draws you closer together. As you unite yourself with your Heavenly Father and you come in line, it sucks you two together. It's really neat having a third party involved. And so I talk to my kids about getting married in spite of. And I told this young man, I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. I fully support you asking for my daughter's hand. And I hope that if I had told you no, you would have married her anyway. Because if you wouldn't have, you're probably not worthy of her. And you probably don't know enough to really be as loyal as you need to be.
Yeah.
To get through all of life together.
I like our conversations for this reason, Cameron. I use the term infatuation, right? And infatuation could actually be love, right? But it could also be fish love, right?
What did you just say? Fish love? What's fish love?
Fish love is. I saw a video one time. I thought it was well described, and I might not do a great job at it. But he says, a lot of people have fish love in their lives, right? And it's basically you catch a fish and you're excited you have the fish because what the fish can do for you. It can feed you. There's the excitement of catching it. Oh. But it's all about what the fish can do for you. You're not loving the fish because of what you can do for it, right? Or because you have that connection. And so I simplify things, and you know this, and you grow them into what they really mean, right? I think so much of the time we disagree, but we're on the same page. But I simplify it so much for me, and you build it out and describe what I'm really trying to say, which is this: is to me, you have to be beyond that point where you're giddy about it, right? Yeah, and that's why I talk about you want to go through a couple of seasons with somebody, right? And maybe that happens very quickly. Maybe it happens over time. Okay. But you want to be ticked off at them, right? You want to see them ticked off at you. You want to see them facing the world and how they manage themselves in those situations. And they need to see you doing that too, right? There's things that and again, this is because once that infatuation is gone, once that infatuation love subsides, that person is who that person is. And you need to be able to love them through that. And you need to be able to serve them through that. And they need to be able to serve you and love you through that. Right? Because, and I think that's really the key is, and that's why I told my brother, you really, and again, I'm in the same situation now. He's divorced. The girl who was infatuated with was divorced. Right? They're still in the comparison phase. They're in this crazy comparison phase, right? Where I just divorced this lady and I'm comparing her to this new lady, and this new lady is so much better. This has got to be but they're still in that early phase, right? She's doing everything right. She's saying everything right. She's overlooking all his flaws and everything that she sees because she just sees it's not her ex-husband, right? That's what she sees.
No, so it's actually deeper than that. It's deeper than that because what's happened, okay, so a couple who have grown apart and they are at the point where they have decided to divorce or they are divorced. At some point, they decide, I'm not going to do anything beyond what I would do for a stranger for that person. I'm not going to sacrifice anymore. I'm not going to hold back anymore unless I would hold back for a stranger. And so what happens is, and that's why it's so tough for couples who divorce to maintain a cordial relationship even when they have kids together. And I have a buddy who's been divorced and his best friend is his ex-wife. So I get that there are exceptions, okay? Absolutely, there are exceptions. But generally, when you decide to get divorced, it's because you decided, I'm not going to sacrifice or serve this person anymore. Now, what's the difference? Well, at the start of a relationship, my daughter told me something the other day. It was so genius. She was like, well, I feel a little bad because I'm realizing I might not have been as honest as I should have been with my boyfriend in this case, because I would sleep through a class, but we were going to meet after that class over by where my class was. And we were just starting dating. And so I would get up and I would run over and I would meet him there and he would say, how's class? No, I just slept through class, but I wanted him to think the best of me. So I didn't say, well, I actually slept through class. I didn't go to class. She says, oh, it's a tough class. This teacher's he has his own thing and his syllabus is great to follow. And I have this test coming up. And she talks about the class in general, knowing that in reality, he was asking about that specific class period that they were meeting afterwards on. And she goes, anyway, so
but I think
that's the difference.
Right. This is natural. Right? It's not like we're trying to be deceptive.
Yeah.
But we are presenting our very, very best. And that's not who we are at our core.
The term is to put your best foot forward.
We should be doing that in every occasion. That's what we should try to do in every occasion.
Yeah.
Right? But eventually.
Hey, the key to my happy marriage? I'm still trying to do that for my wife.
That's great. Yeah.
I'm still trying to get her to stay married to me because you know what? I work hard to not let the natural man in me come out. And I want her to think the best of me.
So that may be the best piece.
So of course I'm doing that.
That may be a best piece of advice you can give. Is to always put your best.
What's that?
Is to always put your best foot forward for your spouse. So I'll share with you. Here's something I find fascinating. Okay. I worked with a good buddy of mine. You know him. He came to me one day and he said to me, his wife was going ballistic one day, out of freaking control. Emotions were over the top. She was screaming and yelling, and it was crazy, right? And we've all seen this in our spouse, every single one of us. It happened with my wife too, and it probably happened with your wife too. I'm not suggesting that's not natural. Okay. The doorbell rang.
Right.
The doorbell rang.
Oh yeah.
She went straight to different person, answered the door. Hi, so-and-so and so-and-so. Right. And then as soon as the door was closed, she just went right back into it. And he said, what the crap was that? Okay. Wait a minute. What was that? You can completely control your emotions. You just did. Why can't you didn't lose control of your emotions. You could completely control them. I just saw it. And she said to him, I'll never forget this.
Yeah.
If you can't take me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best. Right? Now.
Wow.
That's what she said to him. And he came and told me about this. And I thought about this. And I thought, I understand her sentiment. But why the crap would you want to give the person you love the most your very worst in any occasion? Why is it okay to scream and yell, act a fool to the person you're supposed to love them? Why would you not give your best foot forward to them and let the guy at the door see your worst? If anybody needs to see your worst, throw it at him and not at right. And my wife and I had this conversation, and it was kind of a change point for both of us, right? Where, and I see this in my son on the autism spectrum, right? I hear people talk about masking. He goes out in the world and he masks himself. Mm-hmm. And then he comes home and acts a fool.
Yep.
Well, if he can mask it out there, he can mask it in here. I tell you what, mask it in my home, take it out in the world. I'd prefer that, right? This whole masking thing to me is like, so let me get this straight. I'm safe, so you can act like a fool to me, the guy that takes care of you, does everything for you, treats you the kindest of anybody in this world, which I do for my son. Nobody's kinder to him. treats him better than I do.
Yeah.
But it's okay for him to just act a fool to me, but not out in the world, right? And it's just this weird thing. And I'm like you, Cameron. I want to give my wife deserves, if I should be putting my best foot forward for anybody, I would hope it would be for her. And I would hope she would
Yep.
reciprocate, right? Now, certainly,
So it's completely natural.
yeah,
Go ahead.
but eventually, and you know, go back to your daughter, eventually he's going to know she slept through a class and it's going to change the way he views that, right? That's the seasons that we
Right.
need to see, right? How
hmm
does he manage that? Maybe he says, that is a lie. You're a liar. I don't deal with liars. Maybe that's the way he handles life. I don't know. It'd be nice for her to know, right?
Right.
It'd be nice for him to know how he
Yeah.
reacts in that situation. I'm not saying you can't fast forward it into a 3-month span or a 2-month span or even a 1-month span. I'm just saying it might be nice to know who you're marrying. Even, you know, and maybe they do put their best foot forward for the rest of their lives. But I guarantee you, my wife has seen my best foot and my worst foot.
hmm
She's seen she's seen the
Yep.
animal and she's seen Muhammad Ghali, right? And she's seen Kyle.
Yeah. Yep.
She has seen both. And I think she probably saw both prior to us marrying. I think she saw, right? I don't know if you know the story of that time we were driving through a bad neighborhood and a wino or a crackhead or something walked in front of our car. And my wife locked the door.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And the
Yep.
guy saw her and started screaming at her. And I got out of the car and I threatened the guy. I said, "Don't you ever scream at my woman. I will knock you out right here in this street." And I was vicious. And
Yep.
he apologized and I got back in the car and we drove silently for probably, I don't know how long. It seemed like way too long. And she said to me, "Could you please never do that again?" Right? And she said, in such a sweet,
Yeah.
kind, I don't think she was scared of me, but I think she saw who was underneath that best foot in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And she, the way she
hmm
loved me through that made me realize, oh, I'd never want to do, if she never wants me to do that again, I will never do that again. And I said, you know what? I will never
Yeah.
do that again. Now, there was an occasion where she said, "Kyle, get that guy. Get him. Right? She knew, and she said, it's time. Get him.
That you could.
And I did. And I was like, "Oh, really? Get him. And I'm like, okay. So she knew who I was, but she was also capable of loving me through that, right? And so I think when
Yeah.
I talk about seasons, and we all have to realize, like you said, marrying somebody for love is not always the best thing, right? You certainly want to love them, but your love is gonna grow.
Oh sure.
You're gonna be,
hmm
hopefully you love your spouse more after 10
It's
years and after 20 years.
it is. I have a theory. I don't know if this is true, but I think it's true, but I have no proof. But I think it's impossible to do the actions of love without growing and developing a richer, deeper sense of love.
Yeah.
In other words, if the acts of love are serving, care, concern, compassion,
Yeah.
protection, providing, counseling together, communicating. If you do all those actions of love, I can't see love not growing. And on the other hand, if you don't do those things, I also don't see love growing at all. In fact, I think it'll wither. I think it'll die.
Yeah. And I completely and totally agree. And I think, I talk to people about their passions in life, right? And it's interesting to me that, you know, You don't wake up one morning and say, I have a passion for trains, right? What happens is you see a train go by and you say, oh,
Yeah.
that's kind of cool. And then you go home and you maybe Google it and you see there's, 8 different kinds of trains. And then you're like, oh, that's interesting. And you look at each kind and you start to get into it and you start to look for them, right? And you start to find trains and you see different colors. And whatever it is whatever your passion is, it's very rare that it's just, you don't do the work, right? And it's fun to do the work because you're interested, you're curious, you're fascinated, right? And I think the same can be said
Yep.
for relationships, right? Is, oh, that's a pretty girl, right? For men, a lot of times it's just physical attraction is the first step, right? And then from there, you say, that's interesting. I'm curious about this. And you ask questions and you say, wow, after talking to this, and I'm going to tell on myself, when I was younger, I would find the prettiest girl in the room and I
Okay.
was chasing that. And it was
Okay.
very common. The more I talked to them, the less pretty they got. Okay.
Huh.
Now, it didn't mean they were all like that, but I was also, I knew beauty was one thing, but I also knew that there's so much more to it, right? I needed more than just
Yeah.
be physically attracted to this beautiful girl. I knew that wasn't enough, right? And so I was digging in pretty quick.
Sure.
What's your story? Tell me about this. How do you handle this? What's going? So I'm really curious about that kind of stuff. But I think what that does is also, if you find the key things that are cool or interesting, or and that's what happened with Shelly for me. We used to just pal around. I saw her with a tennis bracelet on one time. I said, do you play tennis? She said, yeah. I said, we should go play tennis. She said, okay. We played tennis. We had fun. I said, hey, let's go get ice cream next week. We went and got ice cream and had fun. She was dating other people. I was dating other people. She would call me and say, hey,
Uh-huh.
we're having a chicken dinner at my church. You want to come? I'm like, I'm in. Right. Or I would have 6 tickets to Six Flags. I would say, who's more fun to go with than Shelly? I would take Shelly. Right. And we were friends. And then I think one of the reasons I had my heart broken younger. And so I had this wall built up. Nobody got inside my wall. I was always
Okay.
very surface level. I wasn't pouring my heart out to anybody.
Right.
And over time, the more things we did together, the more I realized my guard was going down. And she was just kind of weaseling her way into my inner circle where I'm like, I'm super comfortable with this girl and I really like her. And she's, and I think for me,
Mm-hmm.
and that's for me again, I know everybody's different, but for me,
Yeah. I actually came from the opposite end
yeah,
of the scenario. So uh when so I served a mission, and for 2 years I didn't do anything social with girls. Nothing. And then I come home, and I had decided that the next step for me to enter into the world of being an adult was to get married. So I was 21 years old, and I set a goal to be engaged by the time I was 21. Now, it was just a goal. It wasn't a do or die situation, but it caused me to have to do a bunch of things to hit that goal.
right.
So I started dating, and I returned home December 25th, 1996. And then I really didn't date very often. I went to dances, but I didn't date anyone. And February came around, and I was like, man, you know what? I got to go on a date. This going to group things is not working for me. I need to get to know somebody because I get passionate about conversation. It's one of the things I love. And so I started asking girls out 3 days before the Valentine's Day dance to go to the Valentine's dance. Well, everybody I asked was either married or already going. Or actually there was a couple that were engaged, and I said, well, would your fiance mind? Because they didn't tell me no, they just said I'm engaged. So I was like, oh, well, would he mind? I just need to go with someone, I need to practice this thing. Anyway, my wife watched me ask all of these girls out because I was in a building that there was lots of opportunities to ask gals out. And then she had to come walking by, and she came walking by with her cousin, and I asked her cousin out first. And she, by the way, I think was engaged at the time. And then I turned to her and I said, well, how about you? Would you like to go to the Valentine's Day dance with me? And she said, I have to work. Well, I said, can you get it off? And she was not expecting that. So she went, yes. And then I got her number and we went to the Valentine's dance. Now, this is what kicked it off for me. Now, she was cute. Okay. She was cute in a cute way. Red hair, nice figure, cute, definitely my type. I love redheads. Anyway. And so there was something there that I found attractive, but it would not have mattered. Right. She could have been the homeliest girl in the room. And if she had come walking by, I was going to ask her, right? Whoever said yes first, we were going to go to the dance, but it happened to be my future wife. So we go out, and on the way to the dance, she tells me that she hates dogs. And I had literally put my dog down like 2 weeks before. Okay. So I was like, well, that's not a problem. I just put my dog down. And I got to see how she handled that foot in the mouth situation. Sure. She did great. Right. Then she said, hey, my brother lives down here. Can we go visit him? And I was like, sure. And in my mind, I'm like, bam, family's important to her. She has a good relationship with her family. She wants to go see him, even though she's on a date with me. That's pretty cool. And then this is what sealed the deal for me, that she was someone that I was likely to pursue. As we walked into the Student Union building at Boise State University, there was a group of individuals affected by disabilities there who thought I was my brother Brian, very popular guy. Everybody knows him. And as I look like him, because of my stature and some facial features, obviously. But as we walked in, they saw me and they started calling out his name, going, Brian. And they got all excited and they came and they swarmed us. And there was probably 10 to 15 of these individuals that had varying degrees of disabilities. I remember looking over, and here's this girl I'm on a first date with, and she is sitting there trying to engage these guys. One of the guys is holding a lock of her hair and smelling it. And I'm watching her going, this is going to be interesting. Right. And as she realized that this guy had a lock of her hair, she flinched away and looked at him. And then she turned her body fully to the guy and engaged with him. And I was like, whoa, wow. And then later that night, I had learned how to do a floor roll, which is ridiculous for someone who was 6'8" and 300 pounds in a suit. But I could do a floor roll in a suit. And so I showed her how to do a floor roll. She attempted it on the dance floor, head planted right into the floor. I was like, man, does she have a lot of the attributes I find attractive? She's willing to try new things. She's nice and kind to strangers. She handles embarrassing situations very well. She was an okay dancer too. And when I say okay dancer, I did a lot of dancing back then. And so we were okay together on the dance floor, but it was everything else about her that made me go, I'm going to pursue her. Now, here's the thing. At any point, she could have been like, no, this isn't going to work out. And I would have changed I would have stopped trying to pursue her and gone and pursued somebody else. Because I was going to find somebody who was going to marry me for time and eternity. That's my goal.
Yeah, and this is really interesting.
27 years later, that was 97 that we met, and it's 2024. So it's worked out.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
So here's what's interesting. And I wrote down something on my paper, which is commonalities.
Okay.
Right? Our stories are dramatically different. But when I
Yep.
started dating, I knew I was either going to get married or break up too. And I
That's
grew up
right.
in a vol-
One option or
I
the
grew up
other.
in a volatile home where a bunch of brothers, we drove our mom crazy, and she did responded in a crazy manner, my mom. And she did things that as a kid, I'm like, not having that. Not you know what I'm saying? We can all learn from.
Yeah.
I think we create, and I was conscious of it. I'm not sure everybody's conscious of things necessarily, but when I started dating,
Sure.
I said to myself, I had a goal too. You know, my long term goal obviously was time and all eternity as well. But I said,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to find a beautiful girl who's steady. I don't need
Ah,
crazy. I'm not having crazy,
right.
right? And for me to say I'm not having crazy, and I guess that the word crazy is probably a harsh word, but I think it can mean to you whatever it means to you. But for me, it meant certain things with I saw in my mom, and I saw in both of my brothers were married at this point, and I saw some crazy in their wives that I thought. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying they weren't perfect for them or anything. I'm just saying not for me, right? So when
Sure.
you were dating looking for earmarks, check marks, right? But you had a goal and
Yep.
you knew what you were looking for, right? And it wasn't. I dated a couple of girls who were models. They modeled and they were gorgeous. And I remember one time I
Mm-hmm.
picked up one of these models. Her name was Patty. Beautiful, absolute. She was a 1% girl, like one of those kind, right? You know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And she got in the car and she slammed the door and she was mad. And I said, "Are you all right?" And she said, "Well, something just happened and I'm not in a very good mood, but you can put me in a good mood." And I said, "You know what? It's not really my job to put you in a good mood. Let's do this another time." And I saw the ugly come out of her. And I was so
Yeah.
glad I did, right? And so I had seen that. I had seen circumstances. I'll share one other funny dating story because people love this. I was dating this girl, another 1%er. Again, I'm looking for beautiful girls, right?
Okay.
And I was dating this girl, and she was absolutely gorgeous. And we had decided to go dancing somewhere really nice. And so she had on this a beautiful dress, and she had dyed her shoes to match. I remember blue, and I had a junky car at the time. I was matching her with a black suit and maybe some blue in my tie or whatever. And we're driving, and
Right.
I had this old junky car that had a hole in the floorboard on the passenger side. Now, I had covered it up with a placemat so you couldn't see it, and it wasn't a big enough hole.
Yeah.
It wasn't a big enough hole to where it made a lot of noise or anything, but it was there. I knew it. And the reason I knew it is because I had driven through some water slowly one
Yeah.
time, and water came up through the
Oh no.
floor onto and filled up the passenger side with water. So I'm driving.
Over the floor mat and
Yeah, I
everything?
just lifted the floor mat.
Oh my, that's
So I'm in the
awesome.
car with this girl, and we had been dating a while, and she kind of was on me about stuff a little bit more than I liked. But she was beautiful. You know, I mean, you right? She was beautiful. And so we get in the car and she starts nagging me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm
Yeah.
done. This isn't going to work out. Right. But I don't want to be mean. And it starts raining. Right. And I'm driving along and I see a puddle. And I
Oh
think in my
no.
mind,
Oh
if I go through
no.
the puddle, I can soak her feet and she'll have to go home and I can get out of this. Right.
Oh
What I didn't
no.
realize is
Okay.
the last time I had gone through a puddle, it was 2 miles an hour. I was driving about 30. So,
Oh no. So before it seeped in, oh no, you made a jet.
so I
Oh
swerved,
no.
hit the puddle, and I remember blinking, and we were soaked. It shot up through the floorboard like a geyser.
Oh,
And I look over at her, and she's dripping like a wet rat.
that,
And she screamed at me, "You did that on purpose!" That's what she said. And I said, "What are you talking about?
and you're like,
What are
yes,
you
yes, I
talking
did.
about?" And she says, "I I saw you swerve. Take me home, right? And so I took her home. We were so, it's one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, right? But
Right. Yeah.
like you were checking off things that mattered to you, and I was watching for things that mattered to me. I needed a steady, even keeled woman that wasn't, highs and lows that were dramatic. I needed and so I was on the lookout for that. Obviously, physical attraction was one of the first things too, right? But I also knew more important to me than anything was a steady woman, because I was probably the crazy one in the relationship, right? So I needed a steadying force in my life. So the commonalities in both of us, and maybe this is where we get back to what advice do you have for people that are considering getting married, is take yourself out of the emotion of it and say, what is it I really want long term? What am I willing to love through? What am I not willing to love through? Or what are just like some things I don't think I can deal with? Because and realize
deal breakers.
and realize going into it, it's going to be hard. It's just going to be hard. There are going to be times where you don't like each other, right? But if you want to serve each other, you want to find somebody that you just want to serve, that you see the beauty in them and understand who they are so deeply that you just want to serve them. You want to see them happy at your own expense sometimes, right? And if you can find someone who appears to be doing that to you too, right? That is something to look for too. Is somebody that looks to make you happy. Sometimes, even though it's not their favorite thing to do, if you can get those two together, you're going to be okay, right? Because it's never going to work if you're just willing to make them happy, and they just want to be happy, and they're going to put you through the ringer, right? You want somebody that'll reciprocate, and sometimes you can grow into that.
So,
but sometimes people, you got to be. It's again, the commonalities are very of you and I are both. We had a goal. We knew what we wanted and what we were watching to see if those boxes were checked. But we didn't just go into it and say, this is a beautiful girl.
You know what?
I'm in, or it's my first love.
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned boxes and checklists. Okay. Because while I was serving in Philadelphia, we had this guy come in, and he was a leader in the church. I don't even remember his name, but I'm sitting there taking notes on how to serve and, be more Christ-like. And then he says, and elders, in 1 to 24 months, you're going to go home, and you're going to need to find a companion to be your helpmate, and for you two to unite and become one and go serve God together. And he says, you can't do anything about that today except for these things. And he gave some great advice. And I actually did his advice. The one piece of advice that he told us to do was to write down, just take a page and write down attributes that we found attractive. And so that when we saw someone, I'll tell this story. My companion and I, it was dark, and we were walking to a bus stop. It was in Philly. It was cold, and there weren't a whole lot of happy people around. And as we came up to the bus stop, this beautiful young woman just smiled at us. And Kyle, it was a smile of an angel. Right. And she was gorgeous because of this smile. And I remember going back home and pulling out my list and wrote easy smiles, like easily smiles. Now, that you don't have to tug it out of them, but their natural state is to smile, because I found that very attractive. Well, I wrote down every time I would find something attractive, or somebody attractive, I would try and figure out what it was that it was attractive to me, and I would write it down, because he said what's going to happen is you're going to get into a relationship and you might start to get physical. You'll hold hands, you might kiss, and now you have chemicals flowing through your body, and you're not going to know why this person is attractive to you. So you can pull out your list and just go through them and go, oh, this is why I find that person attractive. Now, I wrote all of those things down while I was in the mission field, and I had a list of about 157 things. And I say about because it could have been 167. I know it ended in 7. But I had this list, and I start dating, and when I had decided to marry Sarah, I was like, oh yeah, that list. And I pull it out. She had every attribute on that list except for 2, including she had red hair and she played the cello. And the reason the cello made it on the list is I was at a church meeting one day, and the branch president plays a musical instrument that I'd never seen before. It looked like a ginormous violin. And after he was done, I went up and I was like, that is beautiful. My favorite instrument used to be the French horn. That's now my favorite instrument. What is it called? And he's like, cello. And so I spelled it with a CH and then jello. So it was like totally misspelled, but it was on my list.
Yeah.
And then my wife plays the cello. It was very specific.
Yeah.
So you talk about checking things off. That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
And then after I was married, I got some newlywed advice that I thought was fantastic. And you mentioned this as well. You talked about reciprocating. What word did you use?
Reciprocating.
Yes. Yeah. And what he said, now listen to you. And I think his name was Mickey Stritsky or something like that. And he'd been married like 50 years, right? He'd gotten married when he was a teenager or something. And he was he was close to 70 years old. So he'd been married a long time. And he says, I have some advice for you young couples, and you're all young couples compared to me. He says, look for opportunities to say yes. And he says, young men, you husbands, when your wife asks you to do something, look for a way to tell her yes. When she wants to talk, say yes. If she wants you to go to a child's play, say yes. Figure out a way so that you can say yes. And then he said, women, when your husband wants you, say yes. Give yourself fully to him. Look for opportunities to say yes. When he wants to date you and you're tired because you've just spent all day with the kids, look for a way to say yes. And he talked about intimacy. He talked about communication. He talked about finances. He said, look for opportunities to say yes. And then this was the kicker is he says, if you develop that habit of where it's normal for you're always looking for the opportunity to say yes, when you have to say no, it's believable that there's a really good reason for no.
Right. I really like that. The idea of giving somebody advice on marriage is tricky. And I think that's why I was a little hope you had mentioned we might have somebody else on here too, because there's so much, right?
Yeah.
It's hard. How do you boil it down into a piece of advice for somebody getting married or dating, right? It's really hard to boil it down to me.
Yeah.
And so when you first talked about it, I'm like, yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, obviously we have time to have a conversation and talk and tell stories and share of our experiences, but I think also, but I think also I really like that. And I've used that, just so you'll know, I pulled up a little notepad I had because I just added that to my list of things that I heard that I'm going to write. And I want to capture things that I hear that are so powerful. And yesterday I was talking to somebody and they were asking me about my kids. My kids they seem to be doing great. They seem to be happy and buoyant and killing it, I mean, I keep sitting back and going, okay, holy crap. They're like, they're doing great. They're loving life. They're enjoying it. And in the conversation, you and I talked about it before. Saying yes to as much as you can, right? Is it legal, moral, ethical, and nobody gets hurt too bad? Yes. The answer is yes. Right?
Right. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and my kids know it. They'll come to me and they know the qualifications. They know I promote fun, right? And I think the same can
Mm-hmm.
be said for our relationships with our spouses. Legal, moral, ethical, and nobody gets hurt too bad. Say yes. You know, put forth the effort. It's harder to say yes. I think too often we get into and the lady that I was talking to has a bunch of kids, and she says I fell into this trap of no. No was easier. My natural answer was no to everything
Yeah.
because it's easier.
Default.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she said I realized that we weren't doing much of anything. I wasn't letting them do anything. It was just they weren't happy. And she said I decided that why say no when you can say yes? It's going to be a little bit more work, but imagine all the things the memories you'll gain, the stories that you develop and can tell. And right, there's so much more to be said. You'll experience so much more in your life if you say yes, right? And I think it also
Yep.
prevents us from falling into a trap of. I read a book. Oh, it's been years ago, but it talked about the number one. They ran some tests, and who knows what this really meant, but the number one common denominator they found among couples that didn't stay together was contempt.
Yep.
And when you say yes, and not just say yes, but say yes happily and willingly,
Mm-hmm.
doing fun to shop. She didn't buy a lot, but we would go all over the place, and she would shop. And I, what? Do I really like to shop? No. I walk around in all these stores looking at stuff. I don't particularly care for that. But you know what? I realized she loves to do it, and I could stand by her side and chat with her, ask her questions about what she liked, what she didn't like, how she's doing with the kids. What can I? I mean, we had so many great conversations because she was in a correct spirit, right? She was in her zone, and she would share and talk with me and do those
Right.
things. And so we would go out and have dinner and go shopping. We wouldn't go to the movies or anything. We'd just go window shopping. And occasionally she'd buy, occasionally she wouldn't. But the whole point was it was what she loved. And she knew I was in,
Yeah.
and I was going to have fun with her, and I was going to make it right. But and I think the number one reason it was so fun was because I was with her, right? And
Yeah.
she was my passion, right? And I think for men out there, make your wife your passion. I mean, study her, ask her a lot of questions, become fascinated with who she is, and she'll feel it. Your wife will feel it.
Yep.
They'll know, and when they feel that, it matters, right? Because it took my wife years to realize that I was into her. I mean, she was the bomb to me, but it took her years to understand that. And,
Yeah.
and once she did, it was you could see it, right? But again, I think if I have any advice, well, like I said, it's hard to boil it down, but make your spouse your passion. And if you decide that's who you want to be with, I mean, do more for them than you would for yourself. Make them your passion. Make them, who you are and part of your core. And I think that it's hard not to
Yeah.
reciprocate those things. So,
That's good. I'm going to add to that. And so from that, what you're talking about there is you're looking at serving the other person. You're looking at what you can control, which is yourself essentially, and choosing to make them your passion, making them your interest and your focus. There's something that Sarah and I've tried to do, and we're not great at it, but when we do it, it really helps us. And what we do is on a weekly basis, when we're doing it, we haven't done it for a while. I'm excited because I wrote it down. I'm going to go make a plan. She's in a production called The Lamb of God, and she has been practicing and practicing and practicing, and it has been her focus. And we've put some other things off that aren't as urgent, that are just as vital, but they're not as urgent. So we've set those aside. This is one of those things we've set aside, which is we on a regular basis, we choose to actively do something for our future selves, for Sarah and I in the future. And it's a gift that we give ourselves in the future that we do today. And, that might sound ridiculous, but some of it gives me, like, we'll go and we'll do stuff in the garden together. I don't garden, but it's something we'll do together because it's something that is serving us both in the future. And a lot of the kid stuff that we went through, we were able to get through it because we had already dedicated and put things into place for ourselves in the future, our future selves. We time traveled into the future and gave ourselves a gift that we could harvest down the road. And sometimes a date night is just a date night. Okay, that's great. I love date nights. But if you can turn a date night into an investment or a gift to your future selves, man, it adds some really special meaning to it. And it also, fellas, it takes the sting out of doing some things that you just don't want to do, because you recognize you're gonna plant some seeds and there will be a harvest that you get to partake of with your spouse. Yeah. So that's some advice that is really has helped Sarah and I a ton.
And I'll share one quick thing that we did. My wife and I, we went through difficult times. I'm sure there are times where she didn't want me around. I'm sure there are times where I thought, this isn't what I signed up for. You'll have those experiences. You will have those experiences. But one of the things my wife and I did was, anytime we would find out anybody that we knew had a divorce, it became a trigger for us to sit down together, because we knew we weren't above it.
Yep.
Right? We never talked about that with each other, and we never said that word. But we also knew we weren't above it. We knew we were people, flawed individuals. And so every time we would hear of someone else's divorce, we would just go out to dinner and say, and talk about, I would say, what can I do better? And she would say, what can I do better? And we would have these discussions. And it was a discussion where she wanted to get better. And she would let me tell her about things that I may be, that are making me just, unhappy or frustrated. And she would do the same. And we had that open line of communication where it wasn't an attack, and we knew it was how we felt. Right. And I didn't try to tell her not to feel that way. I said, you know what? I want to do better. And she said, I want to do better. And it was really a wonderful thing. And I think our kids caught us doing that as well. There were times where we were having this discussion at the dinner table, and kids would walk in and say, what are you talking about? I said, well, one of our friends got divorced, and we're talking to each other about, well, we can do better for each other, right? We love each other. We want to. There's nothing better for you kids than for us to be together and love each other. And so we're having a discussion about it, right? So, again, to boil it down is hard, but I mean, it's going to be hard. You're going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to have ups and downs. Decide you're going to figure it out. And you'll figure out a way to love each other for a long, long time. And frankly, and I'm at a point now where my kids are, my youngest are 16. And before my wife passed away, we were in a place where the kids were, you still have to parent them. They still require a lot of attention, but they're through the hardest years. The younger years are the hardest years with your kids. Well, they were for us. And things had settled to where we could really just love on each other so much, right? And it was a wonderful thing for us to experience. That is, we had made it through the hard times, and it had, instead of it tearing us apart, it made us closer. And now we got to experience the joy of that closeness, of that love, the love that was stronger 30 years later than it was the day we got married, right? I loved her more. She loved me more.
Yeah.
We knew, right, at our core who we were with each other. And we were going to continually work on that. So hopefully that's helpful, right? Hopefully there's something's come out of this that can be helpful for somebody. Yeah. Decide what you want.
I agree.
Figure it out. Work at it.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Cameron. I appreciate it, man. It's always great having these conversations with you.
Agreed.